Hello, my dear audience. Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Micro. I am so happy to be here with you. As always, I hope you had a great week. If this is your first time listening, welcome to the podcast. I hope you enjoy it. So, on today's episode, we have Dr. Rebekah Martin, and she started in the field as a medical laboratory scientist. Eventually, she got her PhD. She's a microbiologist, but she's here to discuss a book which is called 101 Topics for Clinical Microbiology Laboratory Leaders. And as you are listening to the episode, my apologies when I introduced her and mentioned her book. I said leadership instead of leaders for the title of the book, but it is leaders. And she's going to discuss what the book is about, but it has some great information about validations, verifications, some very important topics that as microbiology leaders, whether you're a manager, a supervisor, a director, or even if you're involved in a project, those are very important. Those are things that you need to know. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So those of you that are in the audience and if you work in a lab, and this goes beyond microbiology, but sometimes there is so much information, right? You know that from organisms, reactions, antibiotics, and then if you are like in a leadership position, you have so many other things to deal with, also accreditation and or validation and things like that. So today we are here to discuss, a publication. There was a nice book where perhaps some of these things, they're put in one place and making it a little bit easier. So with me today, I have Dr. Rebekah Martin to discuss a book titled 101 Topics for the Clinical Microbiology Leadership. So, Dr. Martin, welcome to Let's Talk Micro.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation. Um, yeah, I guess since this is my first time on the podcast, I'll go ahead and introduce myself to your listeners. I've been working in or adjacent to the Clinical Microbiology Laboratory for God, I think the last 15 years at this point. I currently work in industry. I'm with medical affairs at BD. And I live and work in the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region, which is really fun and really cool. But I'm obviously, I have an American accent. So a lot of my experience was in or around clinical microbiology laboratories in the United States. Long before I joined BD, right out of college, I worked as a medical laboratory scientist in a clinical microbiology lab in downtown Detroit. I did a lot of urine cultures, a lot of gram stains, a lot of things like that. I eventually got my PhD. I then completed a clinical microbiology postdoctoral fellowship. I worked as an associate technical director of clinical microbiology at a national reference laboratory. And throughout the years, I've also taught a few university classes in medical microbiology, immunology, genetics, molecular diagnostics, a lot of clinical lab things. So, my professional passions are obviously clinical microbiology, education, and then more recently, of course, laboratory administration and quality management. So, that's where I'm coming from.
Welcome again, and definitely a pleasure having you here. So, when as the episode goes by, we'll
Thank
continue.
you.
We'll continue talking. We'll go over the book, and but let's start with some basics. So, what led or inspired you to create this resource?
That's such a good question. So I was actually approached by ASM Press about the book. I had previously co-authored a chapter in the Clinical Microbiology Procedures Handbook about verification and validation. And they wanted to know if I'd be interested in writing a book that included those topics, verification and validation, but also expanding that to include other administrative and quality topics. And I immediately saw the need for this resource. It was something that I would have loved to have had while I was in training, while I was a student, while I was a laboratory director. It just felt like something really necessary. So, you mentioned, and anybody who's worked in a clinical laboratory at all knows that there are a lot of regulations, a lot of guidelines, a lot of pieces that dictate not just what we do, but how we do it and how we do it legally and how we do it so that we don't harm patients and things like that. It's a lot to keep track of. for anybody. And there's also a lot of locations where you find this information. There's websites, there's books, there's textbooks, there's like documents and articles. It's kind of all over the place. And kind of the idea behind this was to create one resource where we could bring all of this information together in one place in a really easy to use, approachable format that so people don't have to search for it. They can just have it in one place. Um, and it kind of makes it a little less daunting to navigate. It gives at least a good place to start, and if there's additional questions, there's other resources that it points to that you can go to. So I just really felt strongly that this was a useful thing, that the clinical microbiology laboratory could have to kind of fill a gap, that's out there.
That is great, and well said. It's just the word daunting, and it's just yeah, it's so much information, and sometimes where do I start? And then you look here, and maybe you find a piece here, and then a piece there, and then I love it how you said definitely a great place to start, and then if you have more questions, kind of it points you in another direction, but having that everything in that nice one place, it definitely makes it much easier. Okay, so maybe if you can talk a little bit about the I know like in the title, by reading the title, you can see a little bit. It talks about like validations, accreditation. So maybe you can talk about what type of information we can find in this book.
Absolutely. So I'm going to start with kind of the format of it, just to give you an idea of the feel of the book. So I mentioned it's meant to be practical and approachable, and it's one of the ways that I wanted to facilitate that was through having it in a question answer format. So there are chapters, but within every chapter there are distinct questions. So it literally starts with, how is a clinical laboratory defined? So it starts out basic like that, and then it obviously gets more detailed as you move along. But I really wanted this to be a practical how to type of book, and the format really speaks to that. I mean, as we said, it's a lot of information. People have questions. I wanted them to know that even for very simple ones, there's an answer that they can find, in clear language. But the way that the book is divided is into three parts. So the first part has to do with kind of regulatory overview, what's CLIA, who are the regulatory agencies that oversee the clinical lab, a little bit about waived testing, a little bit about lab accreditation. So, kind of the regulatory, and accreditation pieces are within the first part. And then the second part has to do with verification and validation. There's a separate chapter on each performance characteristic. So, one for accuracy, one for precision, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and that also includes some practical examples. So, for things like multiplex validations and verifications, those can be complicated. There's examples for that. Examples of antimicrobial susceptibility test system, um, verification and validation. So, I wanted to include examples, again, as a really practical how to type of thing. And then the final part, part three, is quality management systems. And again, there's a separate chapter for each of the 12 essentials that are typically considered part of a quality management system. Things like laboratory personnel, customer service, nonconformance management, process control, uh, document control, things like that. So, kind of a wide variety of topics, but all around quality in the laboratory, all around administrative things, regulatory things. And throughout the book, there's also a lot of definitions, a lot of examples, again, to really help keep it approachable and kind of be a place where you can start out getting information.
Great. And with all the information it contains, I mean, if there's maybe like a more, and of course, things like validation and that involves, right? That goes all the way from the bench level. We all try to get involved in projects. Sometimes, we're looking for things to do outside of just, let's say, micro, just reading cultures or doing primary testing, and we get involved in projects. But as far as the target audience for this book, is this more like targeted towards, let's say, like a maybe like a director, manager? Is there's like a specific audience?
That's such a good question. It's obviously probably most useful for those who are in lab administration, so the director, the manager, the supervisor. But it's also got actionable information for the medical laboratory scientists as well. Because as you said, it's not just management that takes part in these projects or these processes. Everybody in the lab is responsible for quality. Everybody in the lab takes part in um, competency assessments and things like that. So it's got information, contextual information, as well as actionable information for really anybody who works within the clinical micro laboratory. But it's also, I think, helpful for people who are students or who are trainees in the laboratory, fellows or interns, residents, things like that, because it gives them, again, really practical, easy to read information as kind of an introduction to some of this, and could be a nice study resource as well. And then I think the other thing to mention about the audience is obviously based on the title, it's aimed at the clinical microbiology laboratory personnel, but a lot of probably most of what's in the book is applicable to or adaptable for other specialties as well. So it's not specifically for the chemistry laboratory, but there are ways that it can be adapted, or there's information that's pertinent. Like everybody needs to know what CLIA is. Everybody needs to know what the CDC does. So it's not just for the clinical microbiology laboratory, although the examples are specific to the clinical micro lab.
Okay. And one thing that you said, and I really like that because sometimes maybe when we find ourselves in larger places or that statement about, yeah, we are all responsible for quality in the lab. I think that sometimes that depending on I think, like I in the place that I work at, like I'm in charge of the quality control. And then sometimes people might get this vision, okay, that this is just my job to do everything. Oh no, I don't want to get involved in that. It's like, no, it's everyone's responsibility to make sure that if you're from testing for anything, you're grabbing this reagent, you're grabbing this antibiotic, have it done QC. If you don't know, make sure you know where do we go to see if it has been performed. It's like a weekly or a daily. So it is everyone's responsibility. And we might try to make things easier sometimes because of volume by having one designated person, make sure that everything is okay. But at the end of the day, it falls to everyone. So
Definitely. And there's even throughout the book, there's some, like I said, contextual information. So what is the rationale for this, or where did this come from? So there's some of that information as well, because I think a lot of times we feel like, oh, why do I have to do this all the time or every day? And we know subconsciously that it's for quality, it's for patient safety, but it can feel redundant or not useful if my QC is always in, right? So there's some of that information in there as well.
that is great to hear. And I'm sure that those of in the audience and, like myself, that we do sometimes think about that. It's like, why, we want to know sometimes the why behind. Some people are perfectly okay. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it and I'm good to go. I'm not going to question it. But then some would like to know. So that's definitely greatly appreciated. So, right. So definitely, I'm sure that, and I have talked to people. I had that in the podcast, about, for example, like the Clinical Microbiology Procedures Handbook or the Manual of Clinical Microbiology. So putting this whole thing together, right? It's not easy. And in the case of the other books, you have different people working on different sections, so you have this collaboration. So in this case, was this like a collaboration? And then maybe also you can talk about the approach, right? So we have described that there's a lot of information out there. So how do you proceed and try to getting those things in one place?
Yeah. Such a good question. So starting with the first question, collaboration. So there was no writing collaboration for this project. The book is written only by me. So everything that's in there is from this little brain and such. But there was that being said, there was a team of people around me supporting me in the process from the very beginning. So from the proposal, I got feedback on yes, this is good to include, yes or no, this is not a good idea to include. On the outline, expand on this, don't include this, maybe not this. And then for each and every chapter, there were groups of reviewers who are reading it and providing feedback, really great feedback. So they were fantastic with it. And then additionally, my husband, actually, who is an historian and an archivist, so he's not a microbiologist. He actually read every single chapter as well, just to make sure that it kind of scanned well. As far as reading goes. So there were even though I wrote it, there were a lot of people that were involved in kind of making sure that it was a quality document. Teamwork, even though mine is the only name on the cover. Um, and then you mentioned what approach did I use for kind of putting everything together? How did I find things? How did I organize things? Um, so first of all, you are correct. It is very complicated. There's a lot of information out there to keep track of. For me, it started with having an outline, having a good outline where I had at least a decent amount of detail of the topics that I wanted to cover in each section, in each chapter. So kind of having it formatted out from the very beginning and then keeping to it as much as possible, but also modifying it when a different piece of information came up or when I got feedback about something. So kind of a living document of an outline that I actually did update as I was working on it, kind of from start to finish. So starting with the outline, and then as far as obtaining information, for most of it, I started with the Code of Federal Regulations, which is really what kind of systematically outlines the regulations that we have to follow in the clinical laboratory, in order to comply with CLIA, right? So I would start there and see what is the regulatory expectation? What does everybody within the United States have to do for this particular topic? What does the CFR say about this particular piece? And then kind of going from there, kind of expanding out to other guidance documents, other societies. So what does the CDC have to say about this? What does CLSI have to say about this? So kind of starting there and then moving out to other documents. And then just kind of moving it all into one place. So I have kind of my writing process was I would start with a chapter, write out all the questions that I wanted to ask, and then start putting in pieces of information. What are my references for this? What is the information I want to include here? So just kind of really doing it systematically for each and every topic.
Okay, and then by anything, so definitely there's a challenge here, like anything when doing this type of project or other projects, right? There's always some challenges. Some things work well, some don't, and then definitely here, right? Just one of the challenges was the approach of getting all the information and kind of like directing it to one place, and then anything else that any other challenges, and maybe see if something worked well, what didn't.
That's great. So I've done a decent amount of writing so far in my career. So I kind of have my own like writing routine that kind of helps is as a good baseline. So for example, since grad school, my writing playlist has always been the Lord of the Rings soundtrack, right? So that kind of gets me in my zone and kind of helps me get in the writing mood. So brought to you by the Lord of the Rings. So some things that worked well, I mentioned before, I had that outline. So really, I can be either really organized or really disorganized. And for this, I knew I had to be organized. So having that outline, kind of keeping it, sticking to it, revising it as I went was really helpful there. And then also asking questions of colleagues if I had a question. So I not being afraid to approach other people who might have information that I didn't have or who maybe had experience in something that I needed a little bit more information on. That worked well as well. People were very receptive to answering questions if I had them. And then the reviewer team that I mentioned, that group of support that I had around me, really reviewing and digging into the chapters, they were amazing and had really helpful feedback, and that worked really well for me, and also kind of helped with my confidence. So I've never written a book before, and I had some imposter syndrome as I was writing it, like why am I writing this book? But it was helpful to get both their positive and their critiquing feedback, right? So this is what worked well. This is what didn't work well. So that was also really good. As far as challenges go, I mean, yes, absolutely. Trying to find all of the information, trying to consolidate it, that was maybe the biggest challenge of the book. I think another challenge that I came across was regulations change sometimes. And it took me, I think, like 2-ish years to write this. So regulations changed while I was writing it. So, for example, there were updates to the laboratory personnel section of the Code of Federal Regulations. So I had written it, and then the regulations changed, so I had to go back and rewrite it. So that was a challenge for a couple of sections. Um, Also, just finding time to write. I think we're all very busy in this field, and finding the time to actually sit down and dedicate to write could sometimes be challenging. Personal life got in the way. I actually moved from the United States over to the UK while I was writing this, so that kind of knocked out about a month of writing there. But yeah, I think for the most part, the biggest challenge was, as you said, really just finding and consolidating a lot of the information.
Yeah, and now that you mention, and we have talked about this, when we're talking via email, but definitely that's has to be such a cool experience, and if I had the choice to move anywhere, that's where I will go. I've been grateful enough that I've been to the UK many times, and I've always loved it so much. So I'm getting to live like a local. Has to be such a great experience. So that's amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I really love it. It's fun to be in a different culture that at least I speak the language of, but it's fun to see what the similarities and differences are, even on small things like food that people eat. So yeah, it's been a really great experience so far. I love it.
Great. And now that before we move to the next question, now that you mentioned the Lord of the Rings. I don't know if you have done it. I don't know. I'm sure they still do it, but I had the chance to see like the where they shot like the Harry Potter movies and do like the studio tour, and that was such a great experience. If they're still doing that, I recommend that you go ahead. If you like Harry Potter, I recommend that you go ahead and do that. Yeah.
I mean, yes, I do.
So, do you have a favorite section in this book?
Oh, that's such a hard question. Um, God. So every chapter obviously is special to me in a different way. I think there's probably some chapters that I don't ever need to see again because I spent so much time on them. But I think I think interestingly, part 3, quality management systems, was strangely the most fun to write, which sounds strange because it's quality management systems, which are not fun, but it was a lot of fun to write. I think it was fun to research, kind of fun to insert my own experiences in there and have examples. So I think that was probably the most fun to write. So from that standpoint, maybe that's my favorite. But I don't know. That's so hard. I love them all.
That is great. And if anyone wanted, so where can people go to purchase this book? I know that I saw there's a link to Amazon from what I understand, and
Yeah, so there is so it's on Wiley's website, so it's there, but they can am I able to share on this?
yes, let me know if you need any help.
So there's actually a QR code on your screen right now, um, that you can use to go directly to the website, but you can go on wiley.com, search for the ASM books on there, and you should be able to find this. And you should also be able to find it on ASM's website or the ASM Press website as well.
Perfect. So there you have it for those of you that are visually watching. If not, I'll go to the YouTube channel and look at it, and you can see the screen go. And I'll put some links for the website so you can on the show notes if you're just listening. Okay. Any future plans regarding writing or anything, any other projects that you plan on working on or are working on?
Sure, that's a great question. So I am working on a couple of chapters for other textbooks that are again around verification and validation, as well as quality as well. So I think a couple more chapters coming out soon. One in the Manual of Clinical Microbiology update, and then one in a new textbook geared towards molecular microbiology.
Excellent. So as I said, to the listeners, if you go to the show notes, you're gonna have the links. And so this question, I like to ask it, and right. So in this field, we have that one organism, or we can be more than one, but we have one that either right. There's something that it just either people have like it has like different significance. Either that was like their first project that they did, or something visual. Anyway, there are many reasons why we all have that one organism that we consider it our favorite bug. So, what is your favorite bug?
Oh, that's such a good question. So, my PhD dissertation was on Klebsiella pneumoniae. So, I hold a very special place in my heart for that organism. I'm going to have to go with that as my favorite.
Excellent. I think that's the first time I hear it. Okay. Question, and putting that huge disclaimer out there that we should never ever smell plates. But we know that when we open things on the bench and we different smells hit us and things like that. I'm curious, and I'll tell you my answer. But what does Klebsiella pneumonia smell like to you?
So, to me, it smells cottony. So, like a piece of cotton, kind of. What does it smell like to you?
Like some sort of like weird cheese smell.
Oh no. That's oh man, I'll have to think about that.
Yeah, yeah. You open it and you know that it's there.
I mean, yeah, it has a presence.
Yeah, and even though sometimes like some of those organisms, some of those scents or smells that they hit, they're so distinctive that even if you're not looking at it and it hits you, you know that okay, I know I have Caligenes or a myroides or something like that. So with Klebsiella, it's just like you think of that cheese smell, and I'm like, okay, this is there's some Klebsiella here.
Well, I do like cheese, so maybe there's a subconscious affinity there as well.
Okay, well, yeah. Well, and before the episode kind of comes to an end, is there anything else that you want to add about this book or anything to talk to the audience about?
I mean, I just thank you for inviting me on to talk about this book. I'm really excited about it. Like I said, I think it could be a really fantastic resource for laboratory personnel or anyone who's just interested in this topic. So definitely check it out. I'm happy to hear feedback about it. But yeah, I'm really excited about it. Really proud of it. So thanks for inviting me to chat about it.
Oh, definitely a pleasure. And for the audience, if you're listening, go and check it out. I know that, and we have a wide variety of microbiology in the audience, from directors, bench techs. So I invite you to check it out. And this is something that I have told some people, but I always enjoy when in this field and others. But when people use right their either their position, their training, their education to try to they put some time to try to make things easier for us. I always enjoy that, and I enjoy chatting with people that do that. So on behalf of the whole audience and myself, thank you so much for this book, and of course for taking the time to be in Let's Talk Micro. And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this great episode, and hopefully maybe you purchased the book. It has some great information that we need to know in the lab, especially if you're like a leader, like I said, a director, a supervisor, a manager. And the link is in the show notes, so you can go ahead and check it out. And remember, as always, you can find Let's Talk Micro on any podcast platform. Those are, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, but all podcast platforms. And if you want to follow me on social media, I am on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky Social as Let's Talk Micro, on X as Let's Talk Micro 1, on LinkedIn as Luis Plaza, and I have an email address which is letstalkmicro@outlook.com. And Let's Talk Micro is supported by the American Society for Microbiology. To learn more about microbes, visit asm.org. And if you're looking to learn more about antibiotics, please check out www.learnantibiotics.com and the Learn Antibiotics book available on Amazon. These resources include cheat sheets, practice tests, games, and more, and they are being used by thousands of people worldwide and may be helpful for you or your colleagues. And these are some great resources by Dr. Timothy Gauthier, a very passionate pharmacist. And my dear audience, if you want to support the podcast in any way, you can do so via a Venmo link or via Buy Me a Coffee, KOFI, both links available on the show notes. And that, my dear audience, is the end of this episode. I hope you enjoy listening to Dr. Rebekah Martin and her book. It has such great content, so I invite you to check it out. As always, I enjoy sharing this information with you. And hey, will you be attending Microbe this year in June? Hey, I'll be there in Los Angeles, so I'm gonna start saying it early, but if you see me, if you recognize me, stop by, say hi. So, as always, thank you for the support, thank you for being there. Stay tuned, great things coming your way. So please continue bringing that passion to what you do. It's so important. You do such great work. So, as always, stay motivated, stay safe, and of course, continue talking micro. Until the next time. Bye.